Welcome back, McFly subscribers. Today we will be tying the Stimulator fly, a great stonefly or hopper imitation that works so well in many different conditions, but especially for those amazing stonefly hatches. I will discuss the fly and its applications later in the video, as I'm sure you want to get started tying right away. But in case you haven't seen this channel before, this is McFly Angler.
Starts now.
Okay, let's get started tying. Place the hook securely in your vise. Traditionally, this fly is tied with a 200R style hook, like these here from Risen. They are a long-shanked, curved hook that gives the Stimulator its iconic shape. You can see how this has a drastic curve downward here. That's a great choice for this fly. However, Risen has just come out with these 2312s. Oh, and both are in size 10, by the way. So there's a very similar hook, with that curve and a long shank. And here it is next to the 200R, and you can see they both have that curve. However, the 2312 has a slightly shorter shank and has a slightly thinner wire, so it will be lighter, and in theory the fly will float much better. So I wanted to give this a try. We will also need some thread, and today I'm using Viva's 6/0 in brown. Start your thread about a hook gap back from the eye of the hook, and there's a reason for this. You will see why later in the video. Then snip or snap off the waist. Now bring your thread all the way down to the back of the hook. Now I want to mention, it might be easier if you start the tail portion in the next step up by where you started the thread. If you have trouble with the next step, then don't bring your thread all the way down here. Okay, now for the tail. For that we will use some deer hair. And I really like this Stimulator hair sold by Nature's Spirit. And I'm using the natural color today. Select a small amount. Now I don't really know how to describe the amount you need. Some measure it by pencil width, but I've never found that helpful. After you tie a few though, you will know exactly what you need, but here's a visual representation of the amount. Snip that off the swatch. Then grasp the tips tightly and pull out any underfur. With a bunch this small, you can just use your fingers. And you can see I'm not getting any more off with the comb. Okay, now we need to stack this. To align the tips, place them in your stacker and give it a few firm taps on your table. And you can see the tips are now aligned. Check for any broken tips, and this one is fine, so I'm just grabbing the tips and pulling them out of the stacker. So deer hair comes in many types that could work for this. Here are some different colored Stimulator hairs if you want to try that. But you can also use standard deer hair. Now the fibers I find are not as fine though, but it will work just fine. Also you could even use elk hair as well. Alright, now measure this so you get a small tail. We really don't want any more than a hook gap width long. Transfer that measurement to your other hand and then make a pinch wrap and clinch it down. Now this will flare out the fibers on both the butt ends and the tail. We don't want the tail to be flared out too much, so let's make some loose wraps back a bit to where we want the tail to start. Now pull the fibers up and make loose wraps over them. Keep making loose wraps up until you reach the initial tie-in point and then cinch down. Now you can pull the fibers up and cut the butt ends off. You might need to trim up that section a bit to clean it up. Then make some wraps around the butt ends to finish cleaning up that section. Now make loose wraps back down to the start of the tail. And you want to keep from compressing the deer hair here, as the hair will help with the buoyancy of this fly. You know, I want to come back down slightly here to make the tail a bit shorter. And as you can see, if I tighten the thread, it will flare that tail, so don't do that. Instead, cinch down that thread when you make a wrap back up. Now we need some wire, and I'm using UTC Ultra Wire in a small size and the copper color. Pull off about 4 to 5 wraps of this. Now, I already had some pulled off, and I didn't want to waste. But you end up with a piece about this long, which should tie 5 to 6 of these flies. Tie this in, back near the start of the tail with 2 to 3 wraps, just to capture it. Make sure the tip of the wire extends up to where the deer hair ends. Next we need some dubbing, and I really like Antron for this fly. Today I'm using the ginger variant color. Pull off about this much. Oops, I pulled it all out. And if you do this from one of these, just use your scissors tip to push it back in. Okay, you want a fair amount of this dubbing, but separate out one side of it so you can start with a fine dubbing noodle. Dub the fine portion onto your thread, creating a fine noodle like this, but don't worry about the back. Start winding on the dubbing noodle, creating a tapered abdomen. When you reach the portion not dubbed on, just grab the thread and dubbing and continue to wind. This will make the portion thicker, adding to the taper of the abdomen. Wind this up to the end of the deer hair. Now we need some hackle, and I really like using saddles for these stimulators. Now this is a beautiful saddle by Whiting, and I'm using the natural brown here. Now there's actually a midge saddle, which means you will get a finer feather for smaller size dry flies. But we're tying a size 10 fly, you might say. Yeah, unfortunately, you need a much smaller hackle for this size abdomen than the size of the fly. And this is a size 18 you can see here. Okay, let's prep this feather for tie-in. Cut off the base, and then strip off about 1/4 of the fiber, leaving a bare stem. Now I want to mention, hackle fibers tend to orient to the back of the feather, as you can see here. So let's make sure we get that tied in so those are angling rearward on the fly. Let's pull off a few extra fibers from the far side of the stem like so, which will help that. Tie in the hackle right in front of the thorax. Now there are a few ways to tie in hackle, but I've always liked to make an X-wrap around the hackle and then wind up the stem to secure it very tight. Then bring your thread back to the start of the feather and start winding the feather on. Make 2 wraps in front of the thorax, and then start wrapping rearward with open spiral wraps. And do your best to keep these wraps as even as possible, as this will act as the rib on the fly. When you reach the tail, make 1 wrap right in front of the tail, and then bring the feather on the other side of the hook, and then grab the wire and wrap over the feather. Then you can let go of the feather. Now start wrapping the wire up the hook shank, trying to cross over each feather wrap at the same spot. It also helps to wiggle the wire as you wind up. This will help keep from trapping as many of the feather fibers. Once you reach the thread, then capture it with a couple tight wraps, both over it and in front of it. Then you can helicopter the wire off while stabilizing the hook shank with your other hand. Now you can trim off the waist piece of feather there, but keep it as you could tie a couple more of these flies with it. Now we want to cut off a straight portion from the hackle. This will be a place for the wing to rest. Okay, now for the wing, and we need a lot more than we did for the tail. In fact, maybe about 3 times the amount. Okay, well, that was a little too much. Okay, that's perfect there. With a stack this large, you do need a comb to get out the underfur. Okay, let's stack this piece. And I was really lucky I didn't get any broken tips here, but those should be removed if you get any. Okay, let's measure out the wing to end right about at the back of the abdomen. Transfer it to the other hand, and then make 2 loose wraps before cinching down the thread. This will flare out the butt ends drastically, but that's okay. That's what we want. Just don't let go of that wing. Then make wraps up through those butt ends, cinching down as you go. This does 2 things. First, it will keep this wing from spinning. Second, it will gradually trap less and less fibers, giving a nice taper to the head. When you reach just shy of the hook eye, then bring your thread back up to the initial tie-in spot. Make a couple loose wraps over the wing to help manage the flare on the wing, and then bring your thread back down to the initial tie-in spot. Now grab some standard tying scissors and cut around the butt ends. For the fibers sticking forward over the fly, pull them rearward and cut them off close, and make sure all the butt ends are cut off. Then grab a pair of fine point scissors, like these mitten scissors from McFly, and these will allow you to get in a little closer, hopefully removing the fiber from the hook eye. Okay, that looks really good, but we can remove even more if we use a lighter. Just be really careful, as you can torch the wing very easily. Try to use your finger to guard the wing from the heat, and barely touch the flame to the butt ends. In fact, maybe don't even touch it, just come close. Oh, oops. See how easy it is to catch the wing? Okay, well that looks good enough anyway. Let's go ahead and make some wraps through the butt ends to clean it up. Then pull the wing down and make loose wraps up the wing to help keep it flatter and not as flared out. Okay, that looks really good. Now my wing did spin slightly, and that's okay though. Just snip off any fibers that started to move down the body there. And with your thread right in front of the wing. Now we need some more hackle, and this time I'm going to use a grizzly hackle. However, this one is not a midge saddle. Still, I'm looking for a feather around the 16 size, like this one. Let's prep the feather in the same way, but leave a slightly longer stem, and we'll tie this in right before the wing with a couple wraps. But I always still make at least 1 X-wrap here as well. Then let's make sure that the stem is sticking out in front, and then tie it down tight. Bring your thread back up to the feather. Now for some dubbing, and this time I'm using black. We really don't need much of this though, but we do want to spread it out quite a bit, because we will make a thin, even noodle. Twist that onto your thread with a tight, even noodle, and then wrap the noodle once or twice behind the feather, and then proceed to wrap down the head until you reach the eye. I didn't have enough there, so I'm adding a touch more. You do not want much though right behind that eye. Now let's wrap the feather down the head, but ensure you have one wrap just at the start of the dubbing, and then try to make 4 to 5 wraps if you can. Then capture your feather when you reach the hook eye, trying not to trap any fibers. However, this is really hard to do, and inevitably you will get 1 or 2 trapped. Pull back any of the fibers and try to wrap back up onto them. This will push them rearward slightly out of the hook eye. When you secure the feather, then trim off the waist. You can pinch just behind the hook eye to help seat the thread wraps tighter behind the eye. Then whip finish your fly. Now you might need to use your other hand to pull the fibers rearward while whip finishing. Now time to cement the head, and I love this UV resin by Solarez. They call it Bone Dry, and it's got a handy little paintbrush in the cap. Just make sure you wipe it off once or twice so the tip is finer. Paint a little around the whip finish, and then cure it into place with your UV light. This will secure the head very well and make this fly much more durable. Okay, the fly is now finished. The Stimulator fly. I cannot say this is an easy or even quick fly to tie. However, it is one of my most productive dry flies. They are one of the few flies tied with natural materials that is extremely buoyant. In fact, these can hold up perdigon flies, which are tied with tungsten beads. They're also very visible in the water due to their size and also that massive deer hair wing. They're great at representing stoneflies, or even hoppers. And I've even had success with fooling trout focused on a caddis hatch. However, these obviously are made to look like stoneflies. The curved down butt ends of these mimic the adult female stonefly trying to deposit eggs on the top of the water, which tends to get trout in the mood for food. I tie these often in orange for my fishing needs, but they're also commonly tied in yellow to mimic a yellow Sally. I also love tying them in all black with a red wire. By the way, that yellow one is tied with the 200R from the beginning of this video, and you can see the difference here. It is a much larger hook. Another variation of these I've seen tied, and I've tied myself, is where you add rubber legs here off the side, which really helps in making them look more hopperish. In 2025, I have been doing some monthly series. Series is? Whatever. Last month I tied a bunch of general purpose nymphs, ending the month with this prince nymph. So check out that video. I'll make sure and include the link to that series at the end of this video. And now I'm working on stonefly dry flies, as depending on what part of the country you're in, we should be approaching some amazing stonefly hatches soon. And this series I felt was best started off with these stimulators. Now I do have a long way to go to fill up my stonefly dry box here, so check back next week to see me tie the Madam X. Another great stonefly pattern, but this one is a little bit easier to tie. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. And by the way, I do sell these fly boxes with free shipping on Amazon. Now this one in particular has a magnetic back and open compartments, which is great for dry flies and small midges. When fishing small midges, the rounded sides make pulling them out of the box a cinch. Just run it up the rounded sides to grasp. No need to bring tweezers with you fishing anymore. The magnets also help keep your flies from falling out. And here I am turning this box upside down, and all my flies stay put. I will link to my Amazon storefront below in the description section of this video if you're interested. Also, don't forget to check out my sponsor, Risen Fly. They made the hooks I use today, but they also make some of the best fly rods and reels for the money I have ever used. Best off, they're offering you all a discount. So if you're in the market for a new rod or a bunch of hooks or beads, go to www.risenfly.com and type in McFly at checkout, and they'll give you 15% off of your first order with them. Okay, well, thanks for watching. If you like this video, please hit the like button. I will see you on the next video. Now you go catch some fish.